Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to TEDx Youth at ACS Beirut. My name is Adam Twaili, the lead organizer of this event, and for the past 9 months, the TEDx team and I have been hard at work to deliver this event to you today. I want to start off today by giving you all a brief introduction into TED, TEDx, and TEDx Youth at ACS Beirut. So firstly, what is TED? TED, which stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design, is a global non-profit, non-partisan organization that aims to spread idea around the world. Through their TED conferences, which consist of a series of TED Talks, which are short 8 to 18-minute long talks, they hope to create a more curious and innovative world. In an effort to bring TED Talks across the world, TED founded a program called TEDx. TEDx allowed independent organizers such as ourselves to bring TED to their communities, like ACS, to discuss new ideas boiling up in their communities, which has resulted in this big global phenomenon that you all know of, TED Talks. And that's where we come in. About 9 months ago, I came up with the idea of hosting a TEDx event in an effort to combat the communal struggles both within the ACS community and the Lebanese community, by providing a stage and voice for people in our community to share important ideas and have a platform for civil discourse about these new ideas. We can progress forward as a community. And now, here we are, 9 months later, with 10 unique, amazing speakers, each with their own story. Our theme this year, Stories in Motion, means much more than just storytelling. In our crazy world today, our past, present, and future are constantly being rewritten in history. And at times, it can seem that the forces pulling us apart are stronger than the forces binding us together. But despite all the challenges, this event here serves as a reminder, not only to ourselves, but to the world, that we're here to stay. And today, as you listen to these 10 stories, be curious, engage, think about your story, take it in and reflect. So without any further ado, I'd like to start off our program today with a short message from our sponsor, Beirut Digital District.
تخيل الصورة براسك، فكر بمحيطك، فكر بحياتك، بمستقبلك، كيف كلهم عم بينبشوا على شي واحد بس، السلام. السلام يلي بيجي بعدة أشكال، رواق، راحة بال، أمان، نجاح. سميه مثل ما بدك، مهم أنك تستاهله. بتستاهل تكون فيه ورح تكون فيه، رح تكون ناجح، رح تكون مبسوط. هون بتعمل علاقات بتصير صداقة، هون بتعمل خطط لبكرة بتصير واقع اليوم، هون بتشتغل، بتعيش، بتلعب. إذا بتشوف حياتك هيك يعني هون لازم تكون، هون بعالم برات هالعالم.
Thank you to the Beirut Digital District for sponsoring our event. Next, I'd like to invite our keynote speaker for this event, an ACS graduate in the class of 2003 and currently serves on the Board of Trustees. I'd like to introduce you all to Michael Mohanna.
Hi, everybody. Let's give a round of applause to the amazing TED team for pulling off this unbelievable festival. Hello. Okay. I wanted to talk about why I'm here. A couple of weeks ago, I was asked to give a 10-minute speech on the future of education and youth and culture and getting the education system better, right? Those types of speeches usually have pictures like this. Students hand in hand changing the world, diving deep into technology, finding themselves, connecting across barriers, finding who they are, becoming extremely interesting, serving the next generation, working collaboratively to solve problems that are pressing, right? I'm not going to give that speech. The speech I'm going to give you is on a subject related to a piece of advice I've started giving myself over the last 10 years. And it's basically advice that will allow you to live an authentic and productive life and contribute to your society. And that advice is, don't be interesting. Do not be interesting. Don't be interesting. Okay? Let me back up. All right, about me, a little bit about me. Why am I talking to you about this? So most people know me as Mikey, not Michael. I run an organization called Afikra. That's what people think of when they think of me. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I'm a trustee. What that means is I am part of a group of people who are entrusted to think about ACS's long-term future, which is why I'm here. I'm also an ACS uncle. I won this race, by the way. Shout out to Ava and Alex. I'm an ACS student. Rest in peace to my hair. I used to have hair. Some of you also will not have hair later. And I'm a former teacher. Also, rest in peace to my hair. I used to have hair there too. But more than that, I'm a community member, which is precisely what I'm trying to get at today. So after ACS, I left and I moved to the States, and I worked at some of the most impressive, interesting places, studied at some of the best educational institutions around the world. I moved to the States. I lived there for almost 15 years. I moved all over the place, became super interesting, very well educated, very well aware of the world. I lived in North Carolina, where I went to Duke, became super interesting there. Moved to Chicago, worked at an amazing consulting company, super interesting there. Moved to New Orleans, was a school teacher, super interesting there. Then New York, lived there for a better part of a decade, very interesting, worked at some of the best companies in the world. And about 5-6 years ago, I moved back here. And I know what you're thinking. I know. شو جابك لهون? That's what you're asking yourself. أكيد, that's what you're asking yourself, right? And the only way I can answer that question is by talking about sandcastles. Because I think about sandcastles, and I thought about sandcastles all the time during that entire period. Because when I was a kid, I loved sandcastles. That's not me. Okay? But when I was a kid, I loved sandcastles. I used to build sandcastles all the time. They'd be so interesting and intricate. As I got older and learned about the world, they'd have windows and moats and like bridges and amazing staircases. Super interesting. And that was like a metaphor for who I was as I built my own life. But the problem with sandcastles is you build them on beaches. This is the problem. This is a core fundamental problem with sandcastles. Huge problem. And the problem with beaches is you can't build routes, right? This is a huge problem. And eventually, you leave that beach, and psh, psh, right? That's how that worked. And so North Carolina, all the sandcastles I built there, raho. And then New Orleans, all those sandcastles, there were a lot of them. They had bridges and windows and meadows. They were amazing. All of them went, every last one of them. And the problem is that they never don't go. Sandcastles, there is not a sandcastle that ever survives, ever. They all die. They all go away. So no matter how intricate and beautiful and involved, they're just, heck, a show. So even in New York, the last place I was, this is not me either, but this is what showed up when I Googled cool guy New York City. I was trying to think of that. So even though I was like a super cool, interesting guy in New York before I moved back, I realized that was just a sandcastle, which made me realize that being interesting without purpose is just a party trick. You're a good conversationalist. You're hilarious. I'm hilarious. That's how that works. But it's not more than that, right? So instead of sandcastles, what's the opposite of a sandcastle? What's the opposite of a sandcastle? A tree. A tree is the opposite. Trees have roots. You also can't really control a tree. You just build it. It's just intention. It's effort. Most of the work you don't even see. Most of the work goes down. Comes out. Also different. Trees bear fruits. Trees give life. Sandcastles don't give anything. Another difference. Trees are of the community. They become part of the community. You can't really move a tree. I mean, you can, but it kind of loses its whole thing, right? Trees become part of life. They become part of daily life. And if you're lucky, trees last generations. The trees you walk by every single day were not planted yesterday. They were planted like hundreds of years ago, most of them, not all of them, most of them, right? So trees are not interesting. So I realized that if Okay, if I'm not supposed to be interesting, what am I supposed to be? School tells you you're supposed to be interesting. You're supposed to learn stuff and have cool factoids and have cool things to say. You're supposed to write interesting essays, college applications. You're supposed to be interesting. What are you supposed to be if you're not supposed to be interesting? Let's think about the word interest. Interest has like two definitions. There's the commonplace definition, which is like something that excites your curiosity and attention. But I'm really referring to the second, which is something that you have a stake in, like the financial definition. If you have an interest in something, you have a stake in it, you have skin in the game, you care, right? If you have an interest in a company, you care. If I have an interest in ACS, I show up to do these speeches, right? That's what this looks like. And I realized that it took me like almost 30 years to pay attention to the second definition, how that the second definition of interest is really what defines me. But it'd been staring me in the face since I was a kid. The great American philosopher, Christopher Wallace, had preached this to me over and over and over again. Time and time again, he'd said this to me, and I didn't really pay attention to it. So let me have you listen to Christopher Wallace say this very line.
I just creep up from behind and ask you what your interests are. Who you be with, things to make you smile. What numbers to...
What he is saying in this line, very clear point, is he is trying to say that you are defined by your interests, not what makes you interesting, what you're interested are. Tell me what your interests are, who you be with. Second line is also good. Things that make you smile, what numbers to dial. But that's not what I'm talking about. The point was, I was very interesting, but I wasn't interested. So I guess my point is that if you're going to live a life that is productive and is rooted in something that is not only productive to you, stop building sandcastles and try to start planting trees, which is to say, don't just be interesting. Interesting is good. Don't just be interesting, be interested. Which is to say that start planting trees, start planting seeds. Have them turn into bigger trees. Have them last generations. Have them join other trees and have them be forests. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to tell you that you have to plant those trees in Lebanon. There are many places that need trees. But you need to pick a place, and you have to plant them properly. And for me, it's here. Thanks.
I want to take you all back to the time of November of 2020. My sister and I are having one of our nightly sit on Hannah's cold bedroom floor while thinking out loud sessions and discussing all of the minute details of the world that we had failed to notice before being locked in our rooms for what seemed like all of eternity. Although it was not all bad, that night we came to one of our finest literary conclusions. The observations surrounding the fact that the majority of poets can be placed into two subgroups: those who tend to write in the first person and those who prefer the third. This all circles back to the concept of vulnerability. When speaking in the first person, we feel as though we have placed ourselves out on a platter for the entire world to pick apart and analyze until they are no longer able to. Although we can consciously or subconsciously make the decision to shield ourselves from the hypercritical views that go hand in hand with placing yourself out on that platter, and rather shift the captious eyes onto an anonymous figure. Whether we choose to admit it or not, it is our human nature to want to be seen. It's our human nature to want to be heard, and it's our human nature to crave to be understood. In order to do so, we constantly shrink ourselves and water ourselves down in order to be easier to take in. Why are the watered down versions of ourselves always considered to be the most desirable? It's because we find it easier to be comfortable and remain in that state of comfort instead of taking the tiniest of risks. It's the same reason the poet will shy away from speaking in the first person. We give the fear of mediocrity an excessive amount of power over our lives. Authors hide behind pseudonyms. People dance in confined spaces. We wear big hoodies when it's 100 degrees outside, and we shield ourselves. We shield ourselves from the mediocrity that we all fear because it allows us to wallow in the comfort that we all love. If we all decided to plateau in this state of comfort, there would be no room for growth. You wouldn't have played your best in a game if you had decided to remain comfortable. There would be no revolutionary discoveries if people had decided to remain comfortable. It's time we open our eyes to the beauty of being uncomfortable. Although it's a cliche, I truly believe it to be one of the most important questions that I could ask my generation. If it was your last day on Earth, if these were your last moments on Earth, would you truly be content with the way you have lived your lives up until this moment? If you know me, you probably know that I'm a dancer. Although what you may not know is the origin of my dance career. When I was 6 years old, I played soccer. I played the sport for 2 years and I really, really, really enjoyed it. Although, when I was 8, I broke my leg. My parents were devastated, as was I, but I decided to stop playing. Yes, I conformed to the social norm of staying within the boundaries in which they made me comfortable. Although, in this case, it was for the best, because I eventually did go against them. A year went by, and I only focused on school and instruments, until one day my parents decided to force me into the new sport that I would be doing for the rest of my life, dance. They figured it would just be something to keep me busy, but what they failed to imagine was the impact that it would have on me in these upcoming years. Let's go back 6 years into my life. I'm a 9-year-old girl that has no experience in dance, who just signed up for a dance studio that I was forced to be in. I opened the door of my first class, and I almost burst out into laughter. I mean, I'm 9, almost 10. I open this door, and I'm surrounded by a crowd of 4-year-olds. After a month of dancing with these 4-year-olds, I fell in love with dance like I had never fallen in love with anything else before, which makes sense because I was only 9. But after getting shown up by these borderline infants for a few months, I decided to start devoting all of my time to getting better at this sport. I worked my way up, and eventually I was able to dance with the 6-year-olds. So the next year, I'm 10, almost 11, and I'm dancing with 6-year-olds, which is absurd, but I was ecstatic. Rather than allowing myself to quit because of the uncomfort that I felt when I would walk and see the people my age going to their age-appropriate classes while I stopped by at the daycare classes, I continued to persevere. I continued to show up to dance 4 or more hours a day every week and better myself. Fast forward 1 more year. I'm now 11. The owner of my dance studio pulled me aside during one of my classes and told me to follow her. I'm following her through the gray hallways of my dance studio, which led us to Studio A. She opens the big doors and reveals 100-something 12 to 18-year-old competitive dancers whom have been dancing since the age of 2, currently rehearsing for their upcoming performance. My eyes have never opened so wide in my entire life, and from that moment on, I knew what my next goal was: to be on that team. That same year, I was recruited on the competitive dance team, and by the time I was 13, I was dancing with 18-year-olds. Dance has been the biggest blessing in my life. It has gotten me through the toughest patches. It has made me the person I am today. So why do I catch myself still being embarrassed and ashamed when someone asks to see me dance? Why do we fear mediocrity to the point where it holds us back from expressing our greatest joys? As a society, we need to work on embracing our mediocrity and accepting the fact that not everything we do will be mind-shattering or outstanding. We hold ourselves back by being afraid of being simply ordinary, because it makes us uncomfortable to not only get out of our comfort zones, but because of the fact that we are afraid that people will see right through us and we will be exposed. If we all embraced our humanity, we would have so much more room for growth rather than fear. We would be able to say whatever we wanted, sing whenever we'd like to, confess our love to whomever we felt worthy, and we would find comfort in the uncomfortable. I want to take you all back to a few days ago. It's November 27th of 2021, and my sister and I are back on my cold bedroom floor. That floor filled with nostalgia from the previous year, although this time we were not discussing poetry. We were discussing this talk that I'm having with all of you right now. I was discussing this talk with my sister, reciting it countless amounts of times, solely out of the fear of my own mediocrity today. I have realized that this talk, just like dance, will take years for me to perfect. It will take years for me to surpass this discomfort that I'm feeling right in this moment. Although, regardless, I have succumbed to the desire to want to be heard. That is why I am here standing in front of you all today, embracing my mediocrity rather than shying away from it. Thank you.
Do you know what binary thinking is? When you think of the word binary, you may think of the ones and zeros that run in our computers, in our robots, and in our daily lives. But binary thinking is about humans. It's something that everyone here does every day. Binary thinking is thinking about everything in a 100% agree or 100% disagree way. There is no middle when you use binary thinking. There's only an agree or disagree. But this way of thinking is very popular because it provides certainty. That's what everyone wants to feel. Everyone wants to be certain that they're safe, that everyone agrees with them. It's also easy. Your brain doesn't have to try hard to just agree or disagree. It's a lot harder to figure out the middle ground. A binary thinker would only see one of the two sides of a coin. It would see the head side or the tail side. But a non-binary thinker would be able to see the whole coin, both of its sides, and appreciate it for what it is. The main problem with this whole situation is that binary thinking is getting taught to children. Think of the last time you read a children's book where the bad guys won, or where you figured out why they did what they did, not just because they were evil. When you're small, you think that teachers are always right. You think that whatever you're told, you just have to go do it. And this is just really thinking about binary. Local news often also has binary thinking in it. Usually, the country showing the news changes it to their perspective. They usually say, oh, this country attacked me, but that country might have a totally different standpoint. Today, I'll say a few stories about how binary thinking affected my life and how it will affect yours. This summer, I was unable to travel to my home country, Uzbekistan, because of COVID-19. And to be honest, there was no electricity at our house, so in an effort to make our summer interesting, our father signed us up to a sports camp. And so in this camp, I signed up to 3 sports: badminton, tennis, and basketball. I signed up to 3 sports because I had to. If I could, I'd only sign up to one sport, basketball. Not because I love it, but because that year, my goal was to become better at it. And so, everything was going as planned. I started going to camp and improving my skills. But only halfway through the summer, I realized that I wasn't improving my skills. I was put into a group that was worse than me. And so I decided to change my group. I thought I was the best in my group. I was always getting chosen first, and I was that guy who everyone wanted on their team. So I asked to be changed, and I changed groups to the harder group. And this was a big blow because I was getting chosen last for teams. I would rarely get passes in the beginning. Of course, this changed. I started to find friends in this new group and improve, and I am now miles ahead of where I was at the time. Usually, I had to think about how I had to think about how I would leave my friends behind and how I would have to leave behind the fact that I was being the best player on that team. Last year, I used to have a friend who didn't try in math and Arabic. I would ask them why very often, and they had a very simple answer. They thought they wouldn't use it in their future life, and I thought that was fine, until I figured out that it's 154 hours of your life a year. It's 9,240 minutes and 19 playbacks of all Squid Game episodes. It's a long time to waste just because you think they're not going to use it. When I was young, I used to be obsessed with Lego. I couldn't get enough of it. And the problem with this was I only got Lego twice a year, on my birthday and on New Year's. And so, one day, I had a genius plan. I would go get my savings and buy some Lego myself. And so, the next day, I did just that. And in a way, I was happy. I had gotten what I wanted. But now, thinking back, I feel like I could have done something else with that money. Instead of just having it for pleasure for one or 2 days. I could have donated it, or I could have saved it up for something more practical. Usually, I would have told these stories in a different way. But if anyone noticed here, I told how in each story there was a good side and there was a bad side. I talked about both sides of the story, and basically, if I would have used non-binary thinking, my stories would have gone something like, oh, there was this one time I liked Lego and so I bought some. And it would just make life harder. And so why is binary thinking so important? Usually, in arguments, you won't be able to get only what you want. You'll have to find a sort of compromise between what you want and what they want. And so, usually, I'm asked this a lot, and how do you fight binary thinking when you see it? For example, if someone walks up to you, or if you're in a group project with someone, and they just start pushing on you with binary thinking. And so, I use this one a lot. It's one perspective we didn't cover is X. So, earlier in my talk, I talked about how books for children are usually tailored to good guys winning and bad guys being just evil. Well, in 8th grade, our English program covers the book Outsiders. And the reason why this book is so impactful is because it covers both sides of the story. At the beginning and at the end, it doesn't show that one side was right and the other side was evil just because. It shows that one side did what they did because they feel like it. There was a reason for everything everyone did in that story. It wasn't all planned out and it was realistic. This is the same reason why more and more people are dropping television news to switch over to online news. And so, online news has an advantage. It isn't written by a certain government, and it has both sides of the story in it. And so, I hope everyone here starts thinking with non-binary thinking. I hope everyone here stops agreeing with everything and disagreeing with everything. Stop thinking about everything in black and white. Go to the gray. Thank you.
You know, I always liked flowers. Our house was on a hill. Running around and getting marguerite, coquelicot, cyclamen was a real pleasure. Eating humaida with salt was yummy. My favorite flower was the coquelicot velvet, the rare one. Rare like Lebanon itself rare. Lebanon used to smell and look nice with all these diverse flowers. But one day, the war hit us all. Our houses were destroyed. Our buildings were abandoned. The smell of gunpowder and death filled our noses. And Beirut was split into two entities, West Beirut and East Beirut. شرقية or غربية. Do you still hear these words around you? Beirut became sectarian to the bone, full of fighters from here and there, from different political parties, gangs, militias, kidnappers, snipers who would shoot anyone daring to cross the line when orders were given to do so. Here is what looked like in the 80s, a normal busy day at the checkpoint on the Mathaf. Okay, here is what it looked like at the Mathaf in the 80s, a normal busy day. But that one time, when Vicky and her cousin crossed that same road, it wasn't that busy. They were scared to continue and scared to go back. They didn't want to attract attention and add to their crime of crossing the crime of looking around. They were in the unknown area. They ended have a taxi and going to the Corniche. They met their friends and their new friends. We laughed, we walked, we talked, we took pictures. It was a lovely afternoon. All this was interrupted by the bombing in West Beirut. We all rushed and ran and found ourselves squeezed 3 generations next to the elevator. My ears were full of explosion sounds with my own prayers, Ya Adra, Ya Adra, Ya Allah, echoed by a prayer I have never heard before, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The explosion got louder and closer. Someone said, it is hitting on the Jema. That was AUB. I literally implored God, please, please, God, if you want me to die, I'm fine with that. But not today, and definitely not here. That awkward moment of fearing the same death, us and them, East and West, imploring the same God, fearing the same death, stayed in my memory forever. The war continued, expanded, got more intense and more complicated. But life went on, and my life too. In 1985, I got married and left almost immediately because of the war, thinking I will never return to live here. I went with my husband, half French, half Lebanese, to start a new life and a new family in a safer place. Our daughter was born, and I went back to my studies in Paris, and with my peers, we would walk in the esplanade of the human rights. We would have our snack, our lunch, shawarma, quiche, croissant, whatever, when time permitted it. And Corinne my best friend, used to protest with me for Lebanon. All that helped in our final study in sociology. Even though our research question wasn't related to education or whatsoever, we got the highest grade. The question was, are Lebanese restaurants in Paris reflecting the sectarianism in Lebanon? Well, we found out that 52 restaurants existed at that time, late 80s. And guess what? Lebanese people, clients and employees were mingling joyfully, happily, all together in these tiny places, where in Lebanon, a harsh civil war was hitting on. So we wondered and questioned, were these Lebanese living a myth? The myth of being non-sectarian and being able to live with one another? It seemed like coming to these restaurants were beyond to come to eat. It was to connect and to be with each other and to awaken and live that myth for a moment. I lived myself with the same myth, 16 years abroad. Our kids were born in France, the three of them, but we also lived in different countries. My husband was a CEO in an American company, establishing the business in the countries we lived in. Our first expatriation was in Turkey, in Istanbul. Very quickly, I realized I have to relearn English in order to communicate properly, which I did, starting level 1. You can see my guests, how they were nice and polite, making me feel understood despite my broken English. You can imagine how it was 25 years ago. Second expatriation was in Colombia, Bogota. You know, traveling so far to South America made me stretch my vision of the world beyond Lebanon, beyond Middle East, beyond Europe. But at the same time, as strange as that can be, I was more and more aware that human beings here, there, over there, were similar. Just similar. We are all human beings. Third expatriation was in the country of colors, India, where I learned many and different, varied things. Seeing people with just a blanket sometimes living in the streets of Bombay made me share more and become more appreciative and grateful. In India, we choose to have our kids in 3 different systems. Dylan in the German, Brian in the French, and Jessica in the American School of Bombay. At ASB, Mrs. Wen asked me to join the school to teach IB French. I was very interested, but it wasn't meant to be at that time. For economic reasons, my husband lost his job, and it was ended his mission before its term. And we had to come back to France as usual, but we didn't. And at my farewell party, I want to share this with you, I was surrounded by Indians and Francophones, but also from different parts of the world. As you can see, German, Vietnam, Chile, States, Sudan. Any gathering in India would look like this one. India's learning experience, that multicultural experience, gave me a great lesson in humanities. And we came back to Lebanon. And guess what? I came back to the Corniche, to the same street where I didn't want to die. But this time, looking for a job. 2 days later, I was teaching Soon later, I did my IB workshop, and I became French IB teacher. My first years in ACS, I had a lot to observe, understand, learn, adjust to culturally, emotionally, intellectually. The system was so different to me. It is still sometimes. Teaching different kids from different parts of the world a language they are not immersed in can only be challenging. In ACS, I had the chance to grow and open my wings, presenting my experience in 5 different workshops and 1 in Nisa in Thailand. ACS, year after year, has become more than a place I work in and I teach. It became a place of light and joy because I'm learning and challenging myself constantly. I was supported by talented, amazing people all these 20 years. They made my life and my journey deeper, richer, but also nicer. But Saura started. The good thing about Saura, Lebanese people from different religions and beliefs protested, asked for a new Lebanon, for a change. And I felt amazed, and it was a powerful, I can't describe you the feeling, being with my friends, with my colleagues from different religions, in the streets of Beirut, asking for that change meant a lot to me. And even when I went alone, which I did many times, I didn't feel that alone. I was surrounded by my people. As all that wasn't enough for Beirut and Lebanon, COVID came, arrived, smashed Lebanon, and smashed the world altogether. One day, I came to ACS to take my material from the classroom. I found the Corniche empty, Manara empty from its diverse people. I wanted to scream. It was so depressing. Instead, simply, I wrote to my students asking them to stay safe. Teaching online was very intense during these tense times. Many times, I wanted to be fresh, energetic, but many times I had one hand on my camera to open and another one to wipe a tear. And many times, with a deep breath, welcoming my students, hiding my trembling voice. India's learning was very helpful. Staying healthy, focus on the essentials, appreciating being home with the family, and I started something new, gardening. I got my first plant. Again, Lebanon was hit in his heart. Again, destructions, sorrow, disbelief, anger. I walked with my brothers 1 year later with a lot of grief and still a lot of anger. But life has to continue, isn't it? Teaching the kids of the wounded, destroyed Beirut became more crucial to all of us. And reaching another graduation was very important to all of us. We made it, despite the odds, gracefully, beautifully. It's not a myth. On a personal level, last summer, I took my 3 kids, one after the other, to the airport. Taking them, they left each to a different continent. And I became, like many Lebanese families, wondering, when is it going to be the next reunion? In front of the pictures, when and where. Meanwhile, I'm continuing taking care of my little garden. Meanwhile, I'm continuing coming to ACS, to Manara, to the lighthouse, teaching and learning. They are still going on in this place. And being surrounded with 70 nationalities make my heart, my brain, and my soul resonate. As if I'm in the world, I'm in its heart. This is the feeling I have. You know, I have been in many countries. I have been in hundreds of cities. But the more I travel, the more I cherish this country, the more I cherish this exceptional city with its diversity, which is still standing. I also cherish my school, the American Community School in the heart of Beirut. Because in ACS, there is no us and them. There is no Sharqiyya and Gharbiyya. We are all here, defying the sectarianism and the segregation. I am staying. I have decided. I am staying by this Manara, by my lighthouse. I am staying in ACS, where the Lebanese myth is a daily reality. I am staying because I truly believe only through education we can create real change. Thank you.
How many of you here believe in miracles? Now, to some of you, as I say the word miracle, you might think of a friend or a family member who was given a specific amount of days to live, but then they surprised the doctors and everyone, and they might still be well and alive today. Others of you might think of an event that was registered in a religious scripture, which happened thousands and thousands of years ago, but which you might say it might not happen today. Be that as it may, I want to challenge your definition of miracles today. And to do that, I will illustrate with a story about what happened to me when I did a trip to South Africa with my family in 2012. We were this group of tourists going through an open savanna, and we were on the lookout for wild animals. And as I had my eyes glued on that beautiful scenario, I saw an animal that looked like an antelope and which had curvy horns and white stripes on its back. And I thought, wow, that's a beautiful animal. And I asked the tour guide, what is it called? And he told me, oh, that's a kudu. And I said, wow, a kudu. That's fascinating. As we continued going along that green camouflaged truck that we were in, I saw another animal, and I realized as we came closer to it that it was another kudu. And I was happy again. Wow, there's the kudu again. We continued going, and then I saw another kudu. And then another one. And then another one. And then another one. And at some point I started thinking, okay, when is that lion going to show up? So I would say that miracles are somehow like those kudus. They are beautiful things, but which we might take for granted. I'll define miracles as moments of undeserved pleasure which touch on something beyond our finite existences. As someone who's very passionate about writing, I've always registered several events that have happened to me, and be it on diary or journaling, I used to write them down. And I realized that some of those events were miracles. And in retrospect, I also realized that it was very worthwhile to write them down. So be it on post-it notes, or as reminders on your phone, or as journaling like I did, we should write every miracle. Because we live in a chaotic world in which we need those miracles. And when we write them down and share them, we can inspire the community around us. We can touch on something that I'll call the divine. And we can also shed light in moments of darkness. So miracles can inspire the community around us. In 2016, my family had a terrible car crash. It was my mother's birthday. And our head was filled with plans about what was going to happen that day. And we were thinking about which restaurants we were going to eat and what we were going to do. And as we were going down from the mountains here in Lebanon to Beirut, my father realized that he had forgotten his wallet and we needed to go back. And as we were going back, 2 speeding cars hit our Toyota Avanza and threw us to the curb. All I saw next was a blur. It was a miracle that we survived. I was injured, my mother was injured, my father was as well, and the sheer fact that we came out alive was something that I would never take for granted. But something that happened along with that miracle was what happened when we started sharing the story. And there's something about car crashes that they just make for great stories. People want to hear who was involved and what happened to the people and to the car. And as such, I wrote it down and I shared with some people, my family shared, and there were several things that happened. And to give 2 examples, there was a neighbor who was not very close to my family, but once she heard the story, she started coming into our house every single day and bringing warm Tupperwares filled with food and making sure that every single spot in our house was clean. And there was another family who lived in Beirut, and they visited us several instances, almost every day. And the distance from their house to our house is so great that the number of hours they've added to their schedule in traffic jam was insane. And you all know how lovely traffic jams are here in Lebanon. So they've done that for us. In that way, our small family of Brazilians became rooted in the community. And as we shared that miracle, more people were inspired. Many people were inspired. And that told me that, yes, miracles, when shared, can inspire the community around us. And miracles, they also touch on the divine. And this takes me to 2019, when I was working at a small cafe. And it was a not-for-profit cafe, and I was with one of my friends. And in that cafe, I had several supervisors. One of them was a blonde lady on her mid-20s who never seemed to smile. So when my friend and I, when we cleaned the counter, she didn't say anything. When we put the cookies in the right shelf, she didn't say anything. When we addressed the customer in the nice way that we're supposed to address them, she also didn't say anything. But when my friend stared at the windows for too long, she shouted at him as if he was a wild animal. For better or worse, I did not stay very long at that cafe. And I decided to thank all my supervisors at the end by giving them a bar of chocolate. So I asked them what was their favorite bar of chocolate, and I got it to them. And I also did it for the blonde lady. And as I was giving her the chocolate, I was expecting a polite nod or a hushed thank you. But what I received instead was something that I'm never going to forget. She broke into this thin and radiant smile, which stayed deep in my heart. For me, that smile was a miracle. Now, there are some of you here who might not believe that human beings were made in the image of God. Others might not even believe that there is a God. But there are moments of undeserved joy or love or grace that humble us, that extend beyond our finite existences. And I would say that those are miracles too. And so, when we share them, we inspire the community. And we touch on that thing that I would say is the divine. So miracles inspire the communities. They shed light on the divine. And another thing that miracles do is that they shine a light in moments of darkness. There are some people who have it as a goal for their lives to sit in a paradisiac beach, hold a cool drink in their hands and watch the sunset and have absolutely no worries. They might work for years just to end up in that place. And they would say things such as, "You only live once, YOLO, Hakuna Matata." Now, to me, this is all rubbish. Because life is filled with suffering. There are days in which a thick fog of darkness wraps around us to the point of almost choking us. For some of you, these days might have come last year when there was an explosion in the port of Beirut. For others, it might have come with COVID, as a loved one was afflicted by this terrible disease. Others might still face dark days as such. For me, it came earlier this year when my mother was diagnosed with a tumor on her left breast. She was in Brazil, and I was here in Lebanon with my brother, and it was winter. It was days of lockdowns, and I needed to prepare for classes. I needed to grade essays, and I had responsibilities in my hands that I needed to deal with in one way or another. And there was very little to motivate me. My heart was filled with pain, and I could barely move. But one of the things that kept me going was the knowledge that miracles had happened to me in the past. And having written them down, I could remember them. And knowing that, I also had hope that things in the future would be better, even though the present was very uncertain and very dark. Now, Today, my mother has recovered a lot, and many events have happened in my life, which I have written them down. And some of them are miracles which can inspire the community around us, which can give me a glimpse into the divine, and which will shine a light in future moments of darkness. Now, what about you? When you see an animal with curved horns and white stripes on its back, are you going to engage with it and capture that moment as much as you can? Or are you just going to take a glance and let it go? How many miracles will you write down? Thank you.
If I came up to you and told you that a little idea, a thought perhaps, could change the world, let's face it, I think you'd look at me, you'd laugh, you'd wonder if I was doing okay, but point is, you wouldn't take me seriously. Okay, fine, let's change the scenario. Maybe not the world, let's scale it down to community level, will you? Maybe then you'd listen to what I'd have to say. And what if I told you the story of a real-life experience, a success story to go along with it? Then would you believe me? Well, I'd hope so, and that's what I'm going to make you do today. Because you heard me. The tiniest idea can make a monumental change. Our story starts during the annual visits my family and I used to make to Lebanon when living abroad. And throughout these 11 years abroad, where we lived in the UAE and the US, my family and I would return to Lebanon every summer for around 2 weeks to visit our family. And yes, these visits were short, but they were so valuable because we had the chance to reconnect with family and friends, but also disconnect ourselves from the outside world and immerse ourselves in Lebanon's most beautiful nature. And we'd go on walks and breathe in the fresh air. And as much as I enjoyed every single second, the one thing that would pain me, the one thing that would hurt me, was the lack of any awareness or any direction towards the waste management in our little village called Duwar. There were sites that were simply unseeable, such as overflowing trash dumps or litter disposed at the trunk of trees. But I realized that there was no time to dwell on the issue because I wanted to create a change. Even if it was going to be a small change, I was going to make a change at my level. So in the summer of 2017, hand in hand with my brother, my cousins, and a few friends, we went door to door in Duwar to raise awareness on this issue. We showed residents with the help of visuals how to sort recyclable items at the source. And quite honestly, this initiative was super unofficial, where we genuinely thought that no one was going to listen to us. Little did we know that this was actually the first step of a long journey that we were embarking on, and that we had just planted the first seeds. Back in Lebanon for good, the summer of 2018, we started going on more frequent, more regular walks. And it was then that I noticed the litter thrown everywhere in the forests. And from local juice boxes to chocolate bar wrappers, all the way to cigarettes and beer bottles, it didn't take long to realize that this issue, it ranged from kids all the way to adults. And my aunt, who had also come back from living abroad for 21 years, was shocked by this. And together we thought about what we could do at this stage. So, as loyal citizens of Duwar, we bought pliers to pick up the trash ourselves. And as more and more people would see us pick up this trash and fill up bags and bags that we'd later send for recycling, they'd come up to us and inquire because they too wanted to take part. And little by little, as more people came to be part of this little village ritual, if you will, Duwar started to look cleaner. And here another idea struck us. Our original picking up trash in the forest idea sparked another one. to expand this little initiative outside our village. We thought long and hard about a solution that was practical and sustainable and that could be integrated easily into the lives of people. And we came to the realization at this stage that people's habits are a recollection or a series of repetitive actions. So if we helped people correct their actions, then their habits would change as well. And we did this through our green bag initiative. We created a bag that could be attached to people's car's handbrake and serve as a trash can for anything they were going to dispose out the window, be that a Coca-Cola bottle or a cigarette. And see, this solution was simple. And if people got into the habit of refraining from littering out their window, then they'd do the same in their village. But to make our idea available to a larger group of people, we had to create more bags, a lot more bags. So we started by collecting unused drop cloths from a designer that we knew. And we'd then take these drop cloths to an association for special needs where we worked with challenged people to turn these cloths into reusable, beautiful, eco-friendly bags. And these bags and here a wonderful opportunity presented itself. A flea market in Betmiri, up in the mountains, where we were able to present our idea to a larger group of people, first of all, but also with the money we collected, create even more bags. A lot more bags, actually, 3,000 to be exact. And with all these bags, we thought, well, what can we do? And we decided to distribute them into elementary schools all around the country. Because if we were able to pass the message, and if these students in Lebanon were able to grasp the ideas early on, then potentially harmful impulses would be substituted with the correct actions and stick for a lifetime. Motivated by our successful experiences, we decided to focus back on our roots, to focus back on our beloved Douar. The summer of 2019 was our revisited run of our 2017 adventure, now seeming somewhat short-lived in retrospect. And the goal was to raise awareness in an aim to change the way in which Douar dealt with the disposal of its garbage. And how? Well, by recycling. So we repeated the door-to-door visits, but in larger numbers, because this time around we were supported by the municipality and the village scouts. And with the help of printed visuals, we explained exactly what was expected of each and every resident in Douar. And we demonstrated how each recyclable was to be washed, cleaned, and disposed of in a blue bag that would be collected by the municipality every Thursday. So it was then every resident's job to put this bag on their doorstep as the municipality's truck would pass by and take it to the neighboring village of Bikfaya. And as school began back in September, we moved back down to Beirut. But whenever I had the chance, I would go back to Douar. I would go back to see how our project was evolving. And I was so happy and overjoyed to see the number of blue bags increase every week. It was so clear that the residents of Douar were putting so much importance into the cleanliness of their village and the impact it had on the environment. And I also felt a sense of relief because all that countless hours of explanation and preparation were finally paying off. And see, our success story hasn't evolved any further, although I'm sure it will in the future. And the point is not to tell you to go and fix your village's entire waste management system, but rather to go ahead and give your ideas a try. Because I'm telling you, an idea can go a really long way. If we take a few steps back, Douar's entire way to dispose its garbage was fixed with the simple idea of picking up this trash on our walks through the village. And truth is, you don't have to have a master plan in front of you, nor do you need to have a timeline that puts a date to each step. All you need is that little idea, because you, each and every one of you sitting in this audience today, are the champions of your ideas. And if you truly believe in your ideas, then you have the power to turn them into something great. And you'll see that your ideas, they come to build upon each other. Ideas will come to fruition upon one another. Just how our little picking up trash in the forest idea sparked another one to create a bag to refrain from littering out the window. And how that later pushed us back to Douar to encourage the residents to recycle. every time I go back to Douar, I think, wow, things really did work out. And I think back to that first seed we planted and how that seed was given a chance to grow and how it did grow. So this is my call to you. Your idea can be the tiniest thought, the tiniest figment of your imagination. But if you believe in your idea, if you truly do, then you can turn it into something great, something more than great. And yes, it takes that little push, it takes that little confidence to get started, but you can't step out unless you've jumped in. And you'll deal with what comes next when it happens. But for now, take that big step, make that leap of faith, and you can thank me later.
So, how many of us have been told we've got giant imaginations? We're full of stories in our heads. I'm one of those people. And one place where my imagination takes the highest flight is when I think about my ancestry. I just love looking back at old black and white photos in my mother's picture trunk and imagining conversations with each of the people in these images. Some were taken in Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon. Others were taken in Honduras, El Salvador, and California. My ancestors, they lived storied lives between two worlds, leaving behind their past in exchange for new beginnings and new lands. When I think about my reality and theirs, I think of the renowned Levantine historian Albert Hourani, who said, "To be Levantine is to live in two or more worlds at once without belonging to either." If I could, I'd ask my ancestors what they missed the most about the old world, what they held dearest in the new. If I could, I'd ask them to show me their favorite pair of shoes or their most prized piece of furniture and tell me the story of how it got all the way to the new world. If I could, I'd ask them to share a favorite tune on the oud or to make me a delicious dish from the homeland. And I'd also ask them about the history of their time and the events that moved them and their families to leave all they knew behind. I'd also share with them the story of my time, and I'd embrace them with mutual connection and compassion. These conversations, they live in my imagination, and they form my sense of belonging. Belonging to a tribe of those who were before me and those who are here now. I believe, as Brené Brown says, that belonging is indeed the courage to stand alone and to belong to yourself. But I also believe that belonging is a sense of being part of something bigger than yourself. And I absolutely believe that learning about our ancestral past, embracing our culture and traditions, opens up our eyes to how truly beautiful and unique we are. Perhaps the most precious thing about understanding our ancestry is the sense of belonging it creates in us. I grew up in the foothills of Southern California's Verdugo Mountains, but for as long as I can remember, my imagination lived in the Middle East. I'd bike around my hilly, arid neighborhood and stop to admire the juicy loquats, or academia in Arabic. They were hanging off of our Lebanese Armenian neighbor's yard, and yes, I'd snag one or two when I thought no one was looking. But my teta, my sweet granny, she'd catch me, and she'd tell me those trees grew wild in her village, and children didn't have to steal them to enjoy. Meet my teta, Elaine. Now please, I know it's distracting, but just for a moment, ignore my 1990s hairdo and focus for a minute on little sweet teta. This cute lady, she's Palestinian with Lebanese ancestry, and she's the one who shaped my identity. I thought I'd introduce you to her now since you'll be hearing a lot more about her in this presentation. Data lived next door to our community center in Los Angeles, the nexus of our world, the vessel for our family's worship, and the sanctuary for the preservation of our culture and values. Data loved her small apartment with a Jaffa lemon tree planted into a big pot on her balcony. She wanted to wake up close to the structure she associated with back home. Back home, a land so beautiful her eyes welled with tears when she remembered the generosity of her people and all she left behind. Our community, it connected her to her identity, to belonging. I'm sure the smell of incense, the arched walls, the melodic bells calling to prayer, and those familiar Arabic chants projecting across that LA parking lot and into her window gave her a hope for a return to the land of her origins. Much as we pleaded with Data to leave her small apartment and move into our spacious house in the burbs, this time she was unwilling to leave. Since those LA days, I formed a family, and I've lived in Eastern Europe and East Africa. And in each of these places, we formed precious and unique experiences together. But all the while, I maintained a longing for a connection to the ancestral land. And every chance I could, I'd tell my kids about my Data's Jaffa lemons and all they signified. In Africa, I wanted to share the food culture of Palestine and Lebanon, and so I launched a project making hummus, tabbouleh, baba ganoush, and other Levantine specialties and selling them at local markets and supermarkets in Kampala. My kids, they loved participating in our culture through this activity, until the day my husband came to me and said, "Sweetie, what do you think about moving to Lebanon?" Oh my goodness. Now, how could I possibly let that opportunity go by? This was practically a dream come true. Experiencing my origins in the place, in the real place that Data and my dad and others had told me about. So in a matter of a few weeks, we pulled our kids out of school, we packed our bags, and off we went. We landed in Beirut in December 2017. And boy, do the Lebanese know how to do Christmas. In the city, all along the seacoast and into the mountain villages, village municipalities just compete on setting up the most beautiful Christmas markets and holiday lights you have ever seen. Traditions celebrated by my family back in LA were coming alive before my very eyes, in their original form, in the original place. Plus, after 5 years in beautiful but rustic East Africa, the wealth of amenities we found here and the shimmery Beirut skyline kept us in awe. Our family has experienced so much since those December days. A genuine people's revolution that saw thousands lining the streets demanding dignity and a government worthy of their trust. A currency devaluation that has crippled this economy and left so many hungry and destitute. A dreaded pandemic that seemed remarkably under control here, while the rest of the world was registering very high numbers of the infected. We were doing well here until August 4th, 2020. 2 days prior, on August 2nd, my husband, 3 kids, and I ventured to the north of Lebanon. Our usual return west would be replaced with the COVID summer plan. We rented a cute stone house right next to the beach with arcade windows just north of historic Byblos. Our plan was to spend 3 weeks there, enjoying the sea and the village life and disconnecting from the city in a relatively COVID-safe environment. We had just returned from the shore in front of our house when a friend called to see how we were doing. Just as I began to answer, I looked over to the other side of the room and saw my husband pick up his ringing phone. I saw his jaw drop and his face turn pale. Simultaneously, I heard my friend on the phone say, "There's been an explosion in Beirut, and it seems to have destroyed your neighborhood. Are you guys okay?" I could not have imagined on that sultry August day, as my family and I sat safely 50 kilometers north of Beirut, just how much destruction and loss we would witness in the weeks ahead, and the devastating, life-altering impacts the events of August 4th would have on so many in Lebanon. We were spared from that awful moment when a massive explosion detonated in the port of Beirut, killing at least 218 and injuring over 7,000. The blast displaced over 300,000 families, including ours. But we were spared by a simple decision to take an early August holiday in the north. Many were not so lucky. The next day, I called a friend and offered my condolences at the loss of her father. 3 young firefighters, all from the same family, were summoned to the scene of the first small explosion prior to the massive blast, and they were all from a neighboring village to Barbara. In some parts of Lebanon, white cloth garlands are hung above the main streets when a young unmarried person dies, representing their purity and untimely departure. Seeing those white drapings and hearing mothers wailing at their tragedy hit me to the core. I began to understand that overcoming this horrific tragedy would be a collective struggle, as well as an individual one. As I walked into our destroyed apartment with the blown out front door and heard the crunch of glass under my boots, I connected deeply with my grandmother. In my head, I heard her stories of flight away from danger and aggression, of leaving behind, and of loss. 4 days, we worked on the cleanup of our home amidst the rubble on our street. We saw mounds of ancient stone and earth and rescuers searching for the missing. We received help from complete strangers and lent a hand to those who needed them more than us. And in the ensuing weeks, we packed up and we moved from our neighborhood next to the port up the mountain on the hill behind Beirut. And through those terrible days, I thought much more about my grandmother. I thought of her resilience and that of those who accompanied her through the most tragic experiences of her life. I remembered her laughter and her jokes and her delicious cooking. I thought of the depth of her character and her ability to recover. And this is what carried me through and gave me hope. It is here in Lebanon where I feel the most in place. Each day I live here, even on the hardest ones, I give thanks for the beautiful, sometimes painful, deeply connected feeling that floods me daily. And now I know why my time is here to be in the homeland, to pick the abundant academia freely off the tree outside my kitchen window, to walk through the olive groves with my children and build forts under their shade, to experience my ancestry here and now. I'm convinced that all the love I have for my heritage and my ancestry must be manifested in some clearly palpable way for many to taste, enjoy, and benefit. So with the help of my entire family and the encouragement of my community, I recently launched a brand of traditional Levantine foods, Soul Roots, made in Lebanon for the world to taste. Our brand is a reflection of the love found in the food culture of this place. Good food is the bridge that connects those who came before us, those who are here today, and those who are yet to come. To me, good food is the image of hope that persists in this battered region. I believe that hope can be rekindled through good, honest, authentic work. So as we grow Soul Roots, our mission will be to support youth in underserved communities in Lebanon and the greater Middle East. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that exploring our ancestry is a beautiful and worthwhile journey into the soul. If you can, travel, journey to the place of your origins, taste, smell, touch the earth of your ancestry. There's a magic in that experience that is just so completing. If you can't travel, travel physically in your imagination. Seek to learn all you can about your ancestral traditions and celebrate them. You belong to yourself and you belong to your ancestry. I believe that my path of reconnection with Teta was illuminated in Beirut in the aftermath of August 4th. I'm indebted to Teta for taking the time to share her vulnerability, her stories of love for her homeland, her steadfast hope for return to the beautiful place of her origins. I, like Teta, cannot imagine a life away from my roots. My reconnection with Teta in Lebanon has inspired a desire to serve my people and a need to make a difference in the lives of future generations in this region. To those who came before us, to those we share this world with now, and to those who will come after us, to ancestry, to health, and to hope.
My story has no end. It's ongoing, it's every day. My story does have a start, though. I was thrust into a situation that would ultimately come to be a part of my life to the present day. This is what I looked like as a middle schooler. A different person, inside and out, completely. But around this time, one of my close friends came to me and told me a secret. For the purpose of our story and for the purpose of confidentiality, I'll be referring to this friend as Max. And I'll be using the pronouns they, them. So Max came to me and told me this secret. And the secret was that they had been suffering from a serious mental illness for a while now. They also told me that no one other than their parents and their psychologist knew this piece of information. Max's secret was considerably different from the rest of the secrets that I was told as a middle schooler. When Max came to me and told me this secret, it was a completely out of the blue situation. I would have never expected it, especially from them being one of my close friends. I, as I'm sure many people here, truly thought and believed that I lived in a bubble that couldn't be touched by things like mental illnesses and suicide. They were things that were so abstract to me. I knew they were real. They were a real thing, and I never doubted that. But they were only found in places that were far, far away from me, in communities that weren't like ours. But here's one of my peers, one of my closest friends, coming to me and telling me that they suffer daily because of these mental illnesses. It's not only affecting them, it's a part of them. It's a part of their identity, and it's something that they wake up every day with. And then them telling me this, I was taken aback because I couldn't comprehend that it could hit so close to me. So for the first couple of days, I observed. I talked to Max about it, I researched, and I would ask myself questions like, is this real? Are they really telling me the truth, or are they just doing this for attention? But it didn't take long for me to realize that this was as real as it was going to get, and I was presented with a choice. When Max first came to me and told me this piece of information, I didn't know what to do with it. And the first thing I did was I racked my brain, remembering everything I knew about mental illnesses, and the first thing I could remember was, we needed to get them help. We need to talk to a trusted adult, we need to inform the parents, we need to get them to see a therapist. I knew that I needed to get them help. But the thing is, Max was already seeing a therapist. Max's parents already knew, and they were already getting help. So what's my role in this situation? What do I do now? For starters, I was a kid. I was a kid throughout the entire experience. I still am a kid. I was young, and I wasn't empty myself. I had my own emotional baggage, and I'd never even exposed to anything like this. This secret added weight to my shoulders, the weight of mental illnesses and everything that comes with them, because they are considered a taboo in the majority of communities. And here I was, walking in the hallways of school, interacting with students that knew nothing about Max's situation. Even the teachers that I worked with had no idea. This whole situation was just so new. There was just so much uncertainty. I didn't know why this happened, how it happened, or what even happened. I didn't even know how long this would go on for. Was I ready to be there for Max and everything that comes with it? I'm now proud to say that the answer to that question was yes, I was ready. So from the 8th to the end of the 10th grade, I helped Max by being their repository. I like to use the word repository because of its many definitions. So this is the Merriam-Webster definition for a repository. The bottom two highlighted ones are the ones that I associate the most with. One that contains or stores something non-material, like a secret, and a person to whom something is confided or entrusted. So as I previously mentioned, when I first decided to become Max's repository, I was nowhere near prepared for the responsibilities that came with it. So I made the choice to better myself, upgrade myself, if you will. So I researched. I researched things like how to help someone who's having an anxiety attack, what to say to them, what questions to ask, how to make them feel calmer, how to not trigger them, and how to empathize with them, how to put myself in their shoes. And eventually, I'd like to think that I became Max's safe space, a constant, someone who consistently checks on them, someone who already knows everything. They found it easy to come to me and just cry because I knew the backstory. They knew I wouldn't ask any questions. I would just listen if they wanted to talk, and I would hug them if they wanted to feel warm. The entire 2 to 3 years of my experience, I knew that I was doing this. Why? Simply because I loved Max. I loved Max so much. They were my best friend, and it hurt me to see them go through that pain. Every time I had doubts, every time I felt overwhelmed, I would remember how much they meant to me, how upset I would be if anything were to happen to them, how all my efforts were coming from a place of pure care and love, the love that binds us, the love that gives us a reason for what we're doing.
And Max put so much effort into reciprocating, into giving back to me. They never told me this, but I know without a doubt that they felt like a burden sometimes, no matter how much I told them they weren't. And no matter how much they needed me at a certain point in time, they never drowned me or clung onto me. They never made me feel trapped or obliged to be their repository, no matter how much I emphasized the fact that I wanted to be the person that they can come to no matter what. Some days, when I don't see Max, I text them to check up on them. I ask them how they're doing, how things have been going. The majority of the time, they respond positively. And they almost always tell me that they're fine. The reality is, there's a very high chance that they are lying to me. They could have just gone through a breakdown. They could have been having a horrible day. But at this point, all I can do is hope that just me checking in, just me texting them and asking them how their day is just enough to remind them that there is someone that's thinking about them, someone that cares, and that they're not alone. During the COVID period of time, Max and I lost touch. Because of quarantine, we weren't seeing each other anymore. Weeks would go by where we wouldn't have a proper conversation. I wasn't checking on them. I left them alone. Ask me now why this happened, and I don't have an answer for you. I didn't mean to leave Max alone. Quarantine was a hard time for every one of us, and it pains me to imagine what it was like for them. A couple months later, the COVID situation got a little better here, and Max and I had a long catch-up chat in a restaurant in Hamra. That's when they really told me how bad their situation had gotten during quarantine, and how they had even attempted suicide. I felt pain, coming from a place of pure guilt and regret. I felt partially responsible for their struggles because I hadn't checked on them. I'd left them alone. But this whole period of COVID reminded me and reinforced the fact that I was never actually obliged to be there for them. When they first came to me and told me the secret in the 8th grade, I got this ambitious feeling. I got this feeling of emergency. I went through this devoted and passionate thought process. Why? Because I knew that I wanted to be there for them. But what if I hadn't? What if I had decided to remove myself from the situation right from the start? I could have assessed myself and decided to back out. But I didn't feel the real need to. If I had genuinely believed that I couldn't handle a situation with this much uncertainty and ambiguity, and that my doubts were bigger, and that they had a bigger impact on my decision-making, then by all means, backing out would have been the correct decision, because I could have ended up hurting myself and Max. Who knows, if I'd forced myself to become their repository, I might have said something or acted in a way that could put my own mental health in a worse place, and could put Max's emotional well-being also in a worse place. But that wasn't the case. I had doubts, yes. But my will was stronger, and I chose to be there. My side of the story presented me with responsibilities and a little bit of weight on my shoulders. But, believe it or not, it also gifted me countless benefits. Through this secret, Max and I became so much closer because we share experiences that involve the taboo and invulnerable topics of suicide and mental illnesses. Yes, our experiences are from opposite sides of the same story, but we share a unique connection. I have a unique connection with them that I could never replicate with anybody else. Max changed me. They taught me things that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. I'm someone who jumps at every opportunity, every chance to learn something new, and this wasn't any different. They taught me what it's like to live with a mental illness, the behind the scenes of a mental illness. They taught me how it's like an obsession, how there's a second person in your head, how it feels like they're talking to you, how they get uncomfortable in some situations, they feel stuck, how the smallest things can trigger them, yet the smallest gestures and smallest acts of kindness can relieve them. Through our trials, through my trials and errors, and through their feedback and guidance, I now know how to talk to them and what to say, for the most part. I can't imagine what my life would be like if I hadn't decided right from the start. If I had backed out, I'm proud of my decision for choosing to be there, because if I had backed out, I probably wouldn't have Max as a friend like I do now. They have a strong sense of empathy, and they give the best hugs. It's so easy to talk to them. I love them so much. I am so thankful for every part of our friendship. I would never replace it. I consider this experience to be a gift, because you came into my life and I came into yours, right place at the right time. It's this idea of serendipity that everyone always talks about. So yes, this experience can be considered a gift. It still is a gift. It's a gift that keeps giving. Thank you.
Hello. My story begins 15 years ago. I was still in university, studying English literature, and wondering what I wanted to do next. I finally decided that I will do freelance work, because I thought that would give me the time and the flexibility that I needed to pursue my goals, traveling the world and writing books. The problem was, when I told people that I was studying English literature, they would immediately say, "Oh, so you're going to become a teacher?" To which I always answered, absolutely not. I mean, if there was one thing I knew I never wanted to do, that was to teach, and especially the little ones. I just thought being stuck in a fixed schedule, being exhausted day in and day out, will never allow me to pursue my two goals. And while growing up, even though I had wonderful teachers, very influential, that's how I saw them, as teachers. They never shared stories about their life outside of school. They never talked about their hobbies or interests. And remember, this was a time way before social media. Somebody had to actually tell you for you to know what they were doing. You couldn't just scroll through Facebook or Instagram. It felt as if their life revolved around teaching. And most days, those wonderful teachers, all they did was stand in front of the classroom, repeating themselves countless times and being ignored in the process, and trying very hard to find creative ways to teach us something we weren't interested in. Sounds familiar? I mean, who wants to do that? But after the 7th time, I was told, "Oh, so you're going to become a teacher?" I thought that maybe, just maybe, as the backup to my backup to my backup, I should do my teaching diploma, which I did interning in a grade 12 English class. But I thought at that time that I would never need that degree ever. So for the first 5 years after graduating, I did a lot of freelance work that allowed me to, or helped me pursue my dreams. These work were in the fields of writing, of research, which I'm still extremely passionate about. No two jobs were alike. I did translating, I edited contracts, I worked in an advertising company, I tutored. I loved the freedom and the flexibility that it gave me. It gave me time, it gave me inspiration, it gave me flexibility in my schedule, and yet I wasn't able to pursue either of my goals. It was during those circumstances that a friend of mine told me about a position here at ACS as a teacher assistant in 1st grade. My immediate reaction was, no, thank you. Eventually, I caved in. I emailed the school, I got an interview, and after spending a day In the classroom, as a trial, I got offered a contract. But between that initial conversation I had with my friend and me actually sending in that email, there was a moment of inner reflection. It was a moment when I needed to slow down and I needed to be completely and absolutely honest with myself. The time had come for me to ask myself the hard question. And the question had nothing to do with my position at the school or whether or not I saw myself as a teacher, but it had to do with my goals. It had everything to do with my goals. So I asked myself, where are you on your goals journey? How many pages did you write? How many cities did you travel to? And the answers were nowhere near where I had wanted them to be. I had written one chapter of a story I wasn't excited about, and I had traveled twice to the same city. And for those curious, it was to Sydney, Australia, to visit family. So obviously, the choices I made were not working anymore, and perhaps they never worked in the first place. But I knew that the only reason why I would want to continue doing what I had been doing was because I did not want to be proven wrong. After all, I refused 2 contracts from 2 different schools right after graduating, partially because I didn't want to become a teacher, and also because I was highly encouraged to go to those interviews. I didn't want to feel that I had wasted 5 years of my life just to go back to square one. But how many more years would I have continued wasting if I had done the same thing? You see, saying that you're wrong is one of the hardest things you could possibly admit to yourself. But it is also a life-changing and an empowering moment. Because when you say that you're wrong, it means that you are learning. It means that you are seeing your world and your life in a different way, and it means that you are ready to try something new. And if the words, "I was wrong," is hard to digest, just think of yourself as the writer of your own life. Nobody writes something perfectly from the first time. It doesn't matter who they are. They could be working on a slogan of few words, or it could be a 500-page novel. There are always drafts involved. Sometimes all it takes is a little bit of tweaking here and there. Sometimes you need to remove half of your project, and sometimes you'll need to start all over again. But there are always drafts. It is harder for us to admit that we were wrong when it has to do with an important part of our life, say a career or a friendship or a major in university. Because if we were wrong in such an important part of our life, then it's going to feel as if our entire life has been wrong. But that's not true. A wrong choice is just that, a wrong choice, and not a wrong life. So with all of that in mind, in mid-November of 2012, I signed my first contract with ACS, and I carved for myself a new path. There was a little tiny problem there. I knew nothing about teaching 5-year-olds. But I'm a quick learner, and so for the first 2 years, I watched, I listened, and I learned. This is my 10th year at ACS, and my 6th as a kindergarten teacher. And I have realized rather quickly why someone would willingly choose to stand in front of a classroom, repeating themselves countless times and being ignored in the process, and trying very hard to find creative ways to teach something. And I've loved every day of this journey. The world I found myself in was completely different from the world I had imagined. The kids that I teach, they're funny, they're fun, they're happy, they're creative. They have this innate ability to see something or someone in very different ways. Just trying to get... They're all supposed to be portraits of me, if, there's resemblance. Those kids are risk takers. They are adventurers. Even after telling them not to jump in the muddy puddle because they will get wet and become uncomfortable, they will still go outside, find the biggest and largest puddle and jump in it. Why? Because it's fun. Because that's how they learn about their world. Because those kindergartners are not afraid to be proven wrong. A kindergarten classroom is all about second chances and possibilities, and I got my second chance while in there. So funnily enough, it was while teaching full-time and tutoring almost on a daily basis that I got the chance to fulfill my two dreams. I got the opportunity to travel to so many cities around the world, and I can't wait for this pandemic to be over so I can start traveling again. I recently just finished writing a full draft of my first book, and this time, I wrote a story that was meaningful and that I cared about. And that's not all. Another goal emerged. You see, as a teacher, when I started out, I was very shy, I was quiet, I didn't share my opinions or express my thoughts. I was the kind of teacher who would never dare to offer a counter-argument or a different perspective. So one morning, I had this crazy idea that maybe I should do public speaking. But that goal didn't emerge out of nowhere. It was years in the making, way before I was even aware of it. You see, as a teacher, I'm always put in situations where my thoughts and my opinions are not only welcomed, but are required. I am my students' only advocate, and fighting for what I believe is right for them is part of my job. So I learned to speak up. And in 2018, for the very first time, I was able to present to a group of strangers at a conference that the school hosted here. And the fact that I'm standing in front of you today, sharing the story, shows me how far I've come on this journey. So by trying something different from what I had originally planned for myself, I discovered a passion for teaching I didn't know I had. And because I was happy and continuously pushed out of my comfort zone, I was able to grow, pursue my dreams, fulfill my goals, and find new goals. I used to regret those first 5 years of freelancing, but now I understand that I had to arrive to this point in my life the long way around. Just like every teacher around the world, I experienced teacher burnout, say the week before Christmas break. We're almost there with all its craziness in kindergarten. September is the longest month of the year. We really should have t-shirts that say, I survived September in kindergarten. And by April, I seriously consider changing my own name. I actually had the children call me Miss Amy for a whole day because I couldn't handle the sound of my own name anymore. And if you have no idea what that means, you're welcome to come to my class and see for yourself. On those tough days, the first 5 years act as a reminder that I had tried another path, a path I thought I wanted more than anything else, and it wasn't successful. But this one has been. So as you move on in life, as you make your own choices, remember that those choices are not forever. There may come a time when you will need to rethink them, when you will need to slow down and rethink them. And when that time comes, be open to new possibilities. Be aware of your preconceived ideas and perspectives and be willing to change them. Just because something worked for a while, it doesn't mean it's going to work forever. So when the time comes, ask yourself the hard question. Have the courage to say, this is not working anymore, or I made the wrong choice, or I was wrong, and try something else. Even if it's that one thing you thought you didn't want to do. You never know how it might surprise you. Thank you.
The first time I spoke to a group of about 60 people was in 6th grade during an MUN conference. I've never really been interested in MUN, but my parents kind of forced me into it, so I did it. I prepared myself so much in advance for that conference. I thought I couldn't be more ready to participate, but I couldn't bring myself to speak for the entire day. Every time I had something to say, my mind would suddenly fill with doubts. I just kept thinking to myself, am I going to stutter? What if I say something wrong? I shouldn't be here. I don't belong here. I just want to go home. But I knew that I was stuck in the situation and I had to bring myself to speak. It was what was expected of me from everyone else. To say something. Anything would work, but nothing came out. My body would stiffen, and I felt trapped. Towards the end of the conference, my teacher decided to put me on the spot and ask me to make a comment, give my input. All eyes fell on me. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt powerless over my own body. I slowly stood and faced the crowd, and I stuttered a lot. I don't even think my point got across, even though I was reading off of a document. I had a kid ask me at the end if I was dyslexic. They felt the need to label me somehow. Maybe it was a way of making themselves feel more comfortable. Anyways, I went home that night and cried myself to sleep and faked being sick for my next conference. Looking back at this incident years later, I realized that I just wasn't ready to speak in front of that many people. I wasn't mentally prepared. But now, choosing to give this talk was my own choice. I didn't even tell my parents about it until I knew what I wanted to do, because I was doing this for me and no one else, because I am choosing to put down my shield. I'm choosing to challenge myself, and I'm choosing to grow. Hi, my name is Judy Hamoud, and you may not know me, but if you do, you might have heard or realized that I have a stutter when I speak. This is something I've had with me my entire life, and I've grown not to be ashamed of it anymore. So I'm here to tell my story. In my life, I haven't come across many people who have a stutter. So I don't expect all of you to relate with me on this fact, but what I have witnessed many times are people who are afraid to express themselves, to speak up in front of others. They hide behind this wall that they created, acting as a shield that they think is protecting them, when it really only harms them and doesn't let them achieve their true potential. They try so hard to stop themselves from getting hurt, when it's that pain that allows you to learn and to grow. I'm here to tell you that I am one of those people, or at least was. I was diagnosed with a mild stutter at 5 years old when I was in KG2. My teachers noticed it and told my parents, and they freaked out. It was something completely unexpected, and they tried so hard to get me to speak fluently and comfortably. So I ended up going to a speech therapist for about 4 years, which did help because I learned some speaking techniques. But at that point in my life, I didn't really mind that my stutter was there. It didn't have an effect on how I spoke to people. However, things changed when I moved in 4th grade. The environment was so different, and I'm a relatively shy person, so making this big change was very difficult for me. I had established a sense of comfort at home, and it all vanished. It took me the first year to make a few friends who I was comfortable with, who I could confidently speak in front of. But the people I didn't know very well, I had a very difficult time talking to. Everyday conversations felt like a burden. I felt like I wasn't an asset to things, but more an obstacle that people just had to deal with. There was even this one time where I was just trying to tell my friend something. But because I couldn't fluently utter the words out of my mouth, they told me to, quote, speak like a normal person. We are growing up in a generation that makes it a necessity to fit under specific circumstances, to be normal. But I think being different is important because my differences define who I am, and I'm proud of them. Don't shy away from them. Wear them. Embrace them. I decided that this year I wanted to make a change. I couldn't live the rest of my life hiding from the world. So I started going to therapy. I relived all my past wounds and just healed them. I can't express to you how amazing this shift in my thinking felt. My body felt so much lighter. My brain was so less overworked. The fear of stuttering was based on the lack of self-confidence I had for myself. You may realize that now I can speak to you easily, and that's because I stopped caring what other people thought and gained that confidence. That's why I believe it's truly the key to overcoming your challenges. I was even able to make so many accomplishments, like speaking comfortably in front of my class, or ordering my family's food at a restaurant. Now, to some of you, these may seem like small, silly things that you easily accomplish in your everyday lives. But to me, they mean the world because I wasn't able to do them in the past. They gave me hope that I could do so much more than I ever thought capable of myself. I know I'm lucky that my case of stuttering stood to a mild extent. There are a lot of people out there who have it more severe. And my heart goes out to them because they are such strong people who don't deserve to be judged. Ultimately, the more differences you have, the more unique you are. At the end of the day, you are the only permanent thing in your life. Everything else is temporary. So stop taking yourself for granted. Give yourself credit for your accomplishments. Champion your imperfections. Once you embrace this attitude, the more meaningful your life will be, the happier you'll become. You are the one who decides your future. You are the one in control. What's your next move?
Thank you, Saeed. Is the mic's working? It feels like it's working. I've never talked into a mic like this. I want to say thank you really quickly. I feel almost like an outsider on this stage when I hear so many Lebanese stories about living here and living through the history here, and to witness and to feel how impactful these stories are. And I sit there and I think, right now, when I get called up, I don't have a Lebanese story for people. And those are the most powerful stories today. So I want to thank everybody who shared their deeply personal stories with everybody. And I'll get started on mine. Fail like Will Smith. People have been coming up to me at various points in the day and saying, fail like Will Smith, that sounds like an interesting speech. I can't wait to hear it. And so I feel like I should give some credit for where the title of the speech came from. I was in Miss Muhana's office, and Adam was there, and he asked me for the title of my speech, and I said, I don't know, Adam, what should the title of my speech be? And then Rosie and Adam started talking, and we decided collectively right then and there that the title of the speech would in fact be Fail Like Will Smith. And I thought, well, I certainly can't succeed like Will Smith. You all know who Will Smith is, right? Yeah, no, I cannot succeed like Will Smith. But I'm thinking to myself, I can go up there and fail like Will Smith. That shouldn't be too hard. I feel like I've already in my life out-failed Will Smith. So why not give it a go? So right now, I'm about to try and start to fail like Will Smith right in front of you. I want to start by talking about stories for a second. Saeed said I might talk about Greek mythology and maybe some Buddhist philosophy. I promise, no Greek mythology. I struck it out. Stories help us live with each other and with ourselves. And in the wake of great and sudden suffering, we need something to keep us going. That's why we tell stories. I'm going to get to great and sudden suffering in the second part of this. Tim, earlier in the speech, said that life has a lot of suffering in it, and he's right. And stories are the things that help us make sense of suffering. But before I talk about that, I'd like to talk about my family a little bit. So these are the campanas. This is the age of my siblings when I was born. There's Mike was 16, Mary Ann was 15, Joni was 13, and Paul was 12. And then I came along. There was something terrific about that. As I grew up and when I was very young, my very earliest memories are of being the center of everyone's attention. They're 4 years apart from each other. There's a gap of 12 years. And because they're 4 years apart from each other, they basically hate each other. But they all love me, and they all pay a lot of attention to me, and they spoil me. And that was wonderful. It had a flip side to it. When I was growing up, I felt like an only child all the time. I felt like an outsider. When I got to be 4 and 5 and 6, when you really start to have memories, my oldest brother was off at college. My sister was in nursing school. My sister Joni was struggling with mental illness. And my brother Paul, I hated him, and he used to beat me up all the time. So I felt like an outsider in this house. And a lot of times I was just alone with my mother and father, and it wasn't very fun. But then everyone would come home, and I would think, this is going to be great. We're all going to be together as a family. But what would happen when everyone came home is they would tell stories. And they would tell stories about their childhood and the stuff they did with mom and dad when they were 8 and 9 and 10. And I wasn't in the book yet. I wasn't a character in the story. So they would talk at the table, and I would literally feel left out. But I would listen to the stories, and I would try, by listening to the stories, to become and to feel part of this family. I felt a little bit like an outsider, and I thought to myself, if I can just listen, maybe I can feel like I'm part of these stories. So there was one story that got told a lot. My brothers, Mike and Paul, were house painters. Now, Buffalo, if you've ever heard of Buffalo, New York, it's famous for terrible weather, and that's true. It's terrible there. It's also famous for very, very tall, thin, and long houses. And my two brothers painted these houses on a paint crew for a company called Johnson & Son. And my brother Mike in our family was a legendary painter. Paul once said, if there's a Hall of Fame in painting, Joe, your brother Mike's going to be in it. And Mike used to, from what I understand from these stories, he used to paint on one side of these long houses, and then the rest of the crew would paint on the other side. And it was for two reasons. My brother Mike struggles a little bit with OCD, So he doesn't like to be around people when he works. And the other thing is he painted really fast. And so he would whip through all this painting and he would kind of be bumping into people. And then he would get to a window and he would paint really, really, really slow. So the best story of all time that they ever told was Mike on one side of the house, the 4 guys on the other side of the house. And the 4 guys are painting and the house starts on fire. So there's a burning house, and the 4 guys get down off their ladders, put all the stuff away, run around to tell my brother to come down off the ladder. The house is burning. And my brother Mike stays up on the ladder. He won't come down. He just finishes painting the window while the house is on fire. And when he's done painting the window, he comes down, puts all the equipment away, and then they walk away. I heard this story 100 times. And every time I heard the story, the fire got bigger. The fire got closer to my brother Mike. Until the end, it was like he was painting surrounded by flames. And magically, this window would stay put, and then he would come down. The best part of hearing the story being told was whether it was told by Mike or by Paul. My mom used to get into telling this story. Whoever was telling it would break up laughing before they got through it. And so I would feel weird when I heard this story. It would make me feel, wow, those are my brothers. And then it would make me feel like, oh my God, I'm not part of this family. I'm not part of that story. So what did I do? When I was 16, I walked into the company that my brother Mike and Paul painted for, and I asked for a job. And they kind of remembered my brothers. The way my brothers talked about themselves, I thought they were going to be hero house painters, but they only vaguely remembered them. And so I went and I got a job painting, and I learned how to paint, and I had fun. And then, I've been coursing through this, sorry. I got a job painting, and I had a lot of fun. And then the next year, I called up a friend, and I said, let's start a painting business. By that time, I was teaching, so I had the summers off, and I taught my friend how to paint, and I got all the jobs. It was my business, and he was there with me. And after 5 years, we made a ton of money. It felt like a ton of money. We made $10,000 cash apiece, and these are jobs that I got for us. And we're on the last house, and my buddy Paul has to go back to law school. And I'm stuck painting this house alone. So I call my brother Mike. And he's approaching 40 now. He's 15 years older than I am at the time of this story. I call him and I tell him I need him to paint this house with me. And he says yes. And so he comes and he paints the house. And part of me, of course, wanted to start the other half on fire and see if he would really stay up there and finish painting a window. But I didn't do that, obviously. We finish painting the house after about 3 days, and we go out to lunch. And he sits down and he says, Joe, I can't believe it. I'm up on that ladder, and all I'm thinking about when I'm painting this house is the best days of my life as a teenager painting a house and telling that story about the fire around the window. And here I am with you, my kid brother. And not only are you my kid brother right now, you're my boss. And when he said that to me, I think it might have been the first time that I felt fully like I was a part of my family. And it was a wonderful feeling. And the other thing I learned from that, which I try to take with me, is that the story, the only reason, there was one reason I became a house painter over those summers. And the reason I became a house painter was because I heard my brothers tell the story about the burning window over and over and over again. And I felt a little bit like I was in my family, and I felt like I was a little bit a part of my family. And I used that story to create a life for myself. And it's the stories we tell ourselves that help us understand our past, but it's also the stories we tell ourselves that help us create a future for ourselves. So that's the first of my anecdotes. I'm sorry, I'm way off base with these slides, and I don't know why, because I have completely lost control of this thing. Okay, I'm going to have to just go to the next thing. I said that I wanted in the second part to talk about sudden suffering, great and sudden suffering. That's the middle part of the story. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So our middle today is about great and sudden suffering. When I was in 8th grade, when I was in grammar school, I went to a Catholic school, and we would go home for lunch. And when we would come back, you'd go home, you'd make a ham sandwich or whatever, peanut butter and jelly, and you'd come back and you'd have 2 classes. And it was great to go home for lunch. And one day in February, it was on a Thursday, I walked back to school, and my teacher, Miss Stonebrook, said, "Joe, can you come here for a second? I need you, if you don't mind, to talk to Kathy Fellner." And I thought, of course, I'll talk to Kathy Fellner. I love Kathy Fellner. I've been in love with Kathy Fellner since 1st grade, so I'm more than happy to talk to Kathy Fellner. Kathy Fellner has never paid any attention to me. I can't believe you're asking me to talk to Kathy Fellner. So, Miss Stonebrook takes me out into the hall, and I think she's going to walk me down to the hall to the room where Kathy Fellner's supposed to be studying in. But she doesn't take me there. She takes me outside and walks me down the street a little bit. I think I told you I went to a Catholic school. She walks me inside the church, and Kathy is sitting in one of the pews. A pew is an aisle in a Catholic church, and the church is huge, and it's dark. And Miss Stonebrook walks me up, and by now, of course, I'm thinking, what's going on here? She takes me, sits me down next to Kathy, and then says, "Joe, just sit here for a while, and you guys come back when you're ready." So I sit there, and there I am, sitting next to the love of my life, alone in a dark Catholic church at age 14. It's everybody's dream. And I'm thinking, I want to be good, I want to do the right thing. And then because I'm in 8th grade, I'm also thinking, if whatever I'm supposed to do, I do a good job of right now, maybe Kathy will actually like me. That would be awesome too. So Kathy takes a breath, and she turns to me and she says, "Joe, did you know that Brenda Royston died yesterday?" And I say, "No, I didn't," but my heart sunk immediately. Brenda Royston lived across the street from me and one house over. And this is what I mean about sudden. 10 minutes, 15 minutes before this, I was at home eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, about to just dread a math test or whatever it was I had. And I walk to school, and I find out this person that I'm madly in love with is going to tell me that Brenda Royston is dead, the girl who lives right across the street from me. Brenda was 17, so I was 14. Kathy lived about 7 or 8 blocks away. I don't know, even to this day, exactly how Kathy knew that Brenda died, and I didn't know that. I don't know how she knew that. We were all Catholic families. Everybody had a lot of kids. Maybe one of Kathy's older sisters or brothers told her that story. I don't know. But I was pretty good friends with Brenda's brother, Danny. And I don't know what to tell you about this. There's not much more to say. Kathy and I just sat in the church for about 2 hours. I don't think we said anything to each other. I felt pretty devastated. And then I went home. And it was either the next day, I know it was a Friday, it was either the next day or it was the Friday after, but it was prior to the memorial service. And I was home alone in my living room. The Royston's house was right across the street. I could see people gathered in the driveway. And I sat down in a chair, and I just waited, and I got really, really sad. And I thought right then and there, this was the days before cell phones, I thought right then and there, I want Kathy to call me on the phone right now, because now I'm feeling really bad. So I sat down next to the phone, and I just sat there and I waited for her to call. And of course, she never called. There was no call. I just sat there and thought about this thing. But even then, I learned, because this does happen to us, we're alone and we're feeling terrible. And now, and I think even then, I know that the Roystons, Brenda's family, felt far worse than I did. But all the same, we're alone and we feel terrible, and we need somebody to call, and they don't. What I learned is, even if you're alone feeling that feeling, the desire to have somebody call you is in and of itself a very, very deep human connection. And sometimes just wanting the call, wanting to hear someone else, wanting to hear another voice has to be enough to get us through a situation. And in that case, for me, it was. So last, I've been traveling kind of far away from Will Smith, so I'm going to try to get to the slide, and I think I probably have to apologize to everybody I'm live streaming for. It must have blown the whole thing with this thing going haywire on me. But I'm going to bring us back to Will Smith. He said, fail early, fail often, and fail forward. The video clip is about 1 minute and 47 seconds. And this was my favorite quote. Successful people fail a whole lot more than they succeed. They extract lessons from failure, and they use that energy and that wisdom to come around to the next phase of success. You gotta take your shot. What he goes on to talk about is weightlifting. And what he says is, when you weightlift, you live in a zone of failure. And you push and you push and you push and you push up to the point where you fail. And then one day, you push past it. And you cross a threshold and you succeed. And the success is one time. And before you succeed, you failed hundreds of times. It's the successful people who are the ones willing to fail 100 times for that one success. That's Will Smith's thesis. I love the idea. I have one concern with it. The example is about weightlifting. And it's easy to fail 100 times when you're lifting weights, or when you're trying to improve your time in the mile, or trying to get a better golf swing. It's easy to fail then. What about in real life? What about when it's life and death? Can you really fail 100 times when something's really important? So to think about this, I want to go a little bit beyond Will Smith, and we'll go to somebody who has a little more history than Will Smith, somebody called the Buddha. So here's the little Buddhist philosophy. There was a person who was really, really sad. And he went up to another person, a Buddhist holy person, and he said, I'm angry, I'm melancholy, I'm depressed, I want to feel better. And the holy person said, okay, take this glass of water, I'm going to put this stone in it, and I want you to walk around for 1 week with this stone in this glass of water. And you can't spill any water. And I want you to come back in a week and tell me about it. And so the person does, because he thinks this is going to cure him. So a week goes by, person doesn't spill one drop, comes back to the holy person, he says, here's the water, here's the stone, I didn't spill a drop, I'm still angry, I'm still depressed, okay, I'm not any better. And the holy person says, oh, okay. Well, I want you to go away for another week. Takes the stone out of the glass of water, and he says, go throw the stone in a pond right away. And then come back for a week, in a week. The guy does it. Comes back a week later, and the Buddha says, how do you feel now? And he says, well, I think I still feel exactly the same, but I don't not worried about that stone anymore. And the Buddha says to him, that stone is your anger, that stone is your depression, that stone is your sadness. That stone is never going to change. It's never going away. That glass of water, that's you. So when your zone of consciousness, when your range of experience is small, that stone is going to bump up against that glass of water all the time, and it's the only thing you're going to think about. But when you grow, when you get more experience, when your consciousness expands, when you become a pond, that stone will remain the same size, but it'll sit in that pond and you won't think about it all the time. So our anger, our depression, our sadnesses, they may not change in size, but they don't always have to take up as much of us. We can get bigger, and that thing can stay the same size. And to illustrate that, I want to talk a little bit, very little bit, about my father. Because for a long time, my relationship with my father was the stone I was carrying around. My father drank a little bit too much, he stayed out too late, and he had a bad temper. And I want to stop there. I could go on, but I want to stop there because I want to make very clear to all of you that my father was an awesome human being. He's the funniest person I ever met. When we had dinner parties, my father would hold court and the entire room would be laughing, and all of his children, every one of us who had various grudges against him for various reasons, were so proud that this guy was so funny. And he was so smart. He would tell stories at dinner and we would listen. We just didn't like it when he yelled at us. We just didn't like it when he didn't come home, and we didn't like it when he drank. But we did love him, and I want to make that very clear. So, me and my father fell forward. Me and my father fell often. We fell early, and we kept falling. We tried to have a good relationship over and over and over again. And it worked sometimes, but most of the times it didn't. One day, when I was 16, I was very into running. I was a cross-country runner, and I was terrible. And for my first race against varsity runners, I came in second or third last, twisted my ankle, and I went home very, very, very depressed. And of course, because my father was who my father was, he wasn't home. So I just figured I'm going to go home and be sad. I'm going to make myself some dinner. I'm going to do my chemistry homework, and I'll get up tomorrow. But on this night, about 7 o'clock, my father came home, and he took me out for pizza. And I hadn't seen him in a little while, so I thought to myself, I'm not going to ruin this dinner by telling my father I'm depressed because I ran a terrible race. I also don't want to tell him I came in third last in this race. So what me and my father talked about is what we always talked about, television. This show, WKRP in Cincinnati, was a comedy show from the 80s. This is the shirt I'm wearing. I actually bought this shirt when I went home for Thanksgiving, and I bought it as a tribute to my father. And it doesn't matter what the show was about. It was really funny. What matters is that it was the only thing me and my dad could talk about. And after talking about this show and reliving some of the old laughs from the show, all of a sudden I felt better. I felt great. And it's not a huge triumph, but the next week I went out and ran a race, and I came in 7th or 8th place, and my time improved by quite literally about 4 or 5 minutes, which tells you more about how bad the other time was. But the thing that I learned there is that a story that you share with another person can help you, even if that other person has no idea that they're helping you. You sit down and you eat a meal with someone and you share stories, that can make another person feel better, and you may not even know that you're helping that other person to feel better. So the answer, can you fail often and fail early and then fail your way into success in a matter of life and death, which I do consider a relationship with a parent to be a matter of life and death? The answer is yes. You can be like Will Smith, and you can make the relationships in your life meaningful. That's what I have for today.
Hello, everyone, again. First, before concluding the event today, I wanted to thank some special people who made the event possible today. Starting with all of you, thank you all for coming out today, taking the time out of your day to attend our event. Secondly, I wanted to give a special shout out to the TEDx team. I'm going to name them in order, so please give a round of applause to Sai, our executive producer. Saeed, our head of curation. Noor and Mariam, I don't know where they are, our event planners. Celine and Laith, our production team. Sophia and Astrid, our social media team. Kareem and Nazukat, our sponsorship team. Nadine, our designer. And lastly, Wael, our website manager. I'd also like to give a very big shout out to Miss Rosie, Miss Neda, Miss Brenda, and Miss Maya from the DNA office. And a very, very big thank you to Ms. Shalhoub and Mr. Harani, our faculty advisors. Please come on stage. We have things for you. We have some presents. And last but not least, I'd like to recognize the speakers for the event one last time. Hannah Faqih, please come and take... Oh, we're going in order. Hannah, Afzal, Ms. Raed, Mr. Nevis, Yara, Ms. Griffith, Noura, Ms. Iman, Judy, and last but not least, Mr. Campana. Thank you all.
Last but not least, let's give a round of applause for Adam. Someone who we couldn't have done this without. He's an amazing leader, and we would not be here if it wasn't for him. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you all very soon.